Hello and welcome to Book Break for Greece Public Library, spoiler special edition. My name is Kirstra. I'm one of the librarians here. I moderate our Pints and Prose book discussion group. I'm joined as always by my Book Break buddy, Claire.
Hi, everybody. I'm Claire. I do the historical fiction group on Facebook and also as the Page Turns book group here at the library.
And we have a couple of guests with us today. You probably recognize our director, Cassie, who's been with us for a couple of book breaks now.
Did you want me to say a few words?
If you would like.
I will. And I said this last time, I'm just going to repeat it. How happy I always am to be asked to do this. This is the most fun that a library director gets to have these days.
And we have a new guest with us today. We are joined by Rihanna. Hi, Rihanna.
Hello. Hi, I am Rihanna. I also work at the library, sadly not as a librarian.
Not yet.
Not yet. I started out here as a page and recently became a desk aide. So I have been with the library for a few years now. I started out volunteering. I was one of the original members of the Teen Advisory Board. And yeah, I'm just really excited to do this. I got to read a really good book and just got to open up my horizons a little bit.
Awesome. So thank you and welcome. And today, so we are doing spoiler special, which means we are talking about one book and one book only, and that is this season's hot title, The Four Winds by Kristin Hannah. Yeah. So I think this book certainly has more holds than any other book in the library system currently, and more than I can remember seeing on a book in a very, very long time. So we know lots of y'all are interested in reading this book if you haven't already. If you have not read the book already, please be mindful of the fact that we are going to spoil everything. Like, we're going to be talking about all of it. So if you don't want to know what's going to happen in the book, you might want to pause this video right now and come back to us after you read the book. So that said, we can dive in. So one thing we didn't discuss beforehand was who would be doing kind of the rough sort of summary of the book. Do you feel comfortable winging that, Claire? Should I try it?
Go ahead and try it.
Okay. All right. So The Four Winds is largely the story of Elsa. So Elsa is our main character. She lives in Texas. And she has grown up a sort of sickly child. She had an illness in childhood that has kept her sort of almost confined to her home by her family. She doesn't fit in with her family. She meets a young man out about the town. She falls in love. She gets pregnant. She gets kicked out of her house and goes to essentially, she ends up having sort of a shotgun marriage to her sweetheart and moving in with his family to their farm in Texas. And then the Dust Bowl happens and everything is terrible. This is the worst summary of all time, and I apologize to everyone.
You're doing great.
So as the farm is failing during the Dust Bowl, Elsa makes the decision to move herself and her two children to California to try and find a better life for them. And they experience basically like every hardship you could possibly expect to experience at that time. And they end up living in a migrant camp, day laboring in the fields in California. And they get involved towards the end with some unionists who are trying to organize the migrant workers into the union fold to work for better conditions. I mean, like, broad strokes.
Yeah, right. That's a good overview.
Okay.
I mean, that is what happened.
Kristin Hannah took about 400 pages. I'll just say I summed it up in about 2 minutes. So no, just kidding. But where should we start? Shall we start at the beginning of the book? Shall we start with sort of Elsa herself?
And how horrible her family was to her?
How horrible basically everyone was to her. I mean, her family in particular, for sure.
Well, it was kind of like, the wicked stepmother, wicked stepsister story, even though it was actually her sisters and her mother, who, treated her as lesser than, and she was 26 and already considered a spinster, and her prospects were not deemed to be good. And I think that's kind of why she didn't just meet her future husband, but kind of made herself a sexy little red dress and went out looking for trouble. I mean, I don't really know how else to characterize it.
Yeah.
So she met Trouble, who happened to be kind of a nice guy. And he was younger than her, I believe, by several years.
Yeah, because
and
he was
had
only 18. Yeah.
some rather unsatisfying encounters for her in the back of his truck. Which is
So
where
romantic.
the pregnancy came into
so
play.
Texas, though.
Yeah. Well, I have all kinds of things to say about this book. If you'd like me to just start talking.
Let's go.
Interrupt me if I do too much. So I have never read Kristin Hannah before. I am not a huge fan of historical fiction, which is why I love being asked to do these things, because it causes me to read things I would not read on my own. This book kept me fairly engaged throughout. I had some issues with it, which I'll talk about in a little bit later. But I think for me, the real connection, this is a labor novel in many ways, and I don't know if that has anything to do with its popularity today, in terms of everything that's going on with national politics and the COVID and everything else. But it's also, in my mind, kind of a feminist take on Grapes of Wrath by John Steinbeck, which of course is considered one of the great American novels. I picked up Grapes of Wrath, and I'm only about 94 pages in. And what really struck me, other than the obvious feminist angle, and I think that is what Kristin Hannah was going for, because it is, set in the same time period as Grapes of Wrath. And Grapes of Wrath is a very male-centric book. So what I kind of wonder is how much of that is due to when he wrote it, which was in 1938 or 1939, the fact that he was a man. Now, of course, my phone is ringing. And how much of it was that kind of was more what the society was at that time, was it was very male-centric, and you wouldn't necessarily have had a woman who embarks off to California with her 2 children after her husband leaves. So I was just kind of interested in terms of, John Steinbeck. And one thing that really struck me is the difference in writing. I mean, obviously John Steinbeck, as I said, is, but when you read chapter 1 of his book, if you could indulge me for just a few minutes here. To the red country and part of the gray country of Oklahoma, the last rains came gently, and they did not cut the scarred earth. The plows crossed and recrossed the rivulet marks. The last rains lifted the corn quickly and scattered weed colonies and grass along the sides of the roads, so that the gray country and the dark red country began to disappear under a green cover. And then I contrast that to the descriptions of what was occurring in the Four Winds. And it just gives me a very different feeling about the time reading the 2 books. So I don't know what, if anything, that adds, but I think it would be a very interesting thing to do. What I'm doing right now is to read one book and then either, go back to Steinbeck or start with him anew and compare and contrast the 2 books.
That's really interesting. Because
did you read Grapes of Wrath?
I have not. I actually might now, though. I really liked what you read from that. Sounded incredibly poetic. And I do remember in The Four Winds, it was a very raw and realistic depiction of what was happening. So she really didn't cut corners here. She told it how it was.
That's a good point. I hadn't thought of it that way, but you know what? You're right.
Yeah, like Grapes of Wrath, from what you were saying, just sounded very poetic and tried to make it sound beautiful. This book was just how it was.
Yeah.
Interesting.
She's not interested in putting like a shine on any of the
Oh.
situations.
Yeah, it wasn't a good time. And
Mhm.
she helped us
Yeah.
realize that.
I think the point that was made to me reading this was how women throughout history are dependent upon men, but yet they're left holding the bag, so to speak. She had to figure out a way to feed her children. Many days went hungry. You know, her son has asthma. She's got to figure out what to do. I mean, she even starts trekking out on foot to try to get a doctor. Meanwhile, he's left. You know, so she's the one part I really liked was how supportive his family was of her and how they really embraced her. And despite the fact that she wasn't Catholic, she wasn't Italian, because there was all that stigma going on too, which I imagine during this time period and living in Texas or the Deep South, being a Catholic was not a popular thing at all. So that was one relationship I really enjoyed to see how that developed, is just how much his mom embraced her. But yeah, it's like, I remember her descriptions of like them choking on the dust and like having it in their mouths, and the way the horse was found, when he died. And I could visualize it. It
was very vivid.
Mm-hmm.
I really like her way of writing, and now I want to read more of her books because I just loved it. I mean, it was horrible what she was describing, but I loved it.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. So I've only read one other Kristin Hannah book, which was The Winter Garden, which we discussed with Pints and Prose. And that one is sort of the two narrative setup, where there's a historical narrative and a modern narrative. And the historical narrative is about the siege of Leningrad, which is like brutal and awful in a whole different way. But one of the things I was saying to Claire after I read that book is I found the modern narrative much the weaker of the two. Like, I was just trying to get through those chapters to get to the historical part. So the fact that this one is just all the historical part, that was already like a plus for me. But I did find it page turning. Like, it's over 400 pages. I read it in like 3 days.
I think I read like the last half of it in one night.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I haven't read historical fiction before. I never thought I was interested in it. But when I got the chance to do this book break with you guys and I found out this was historical fiction, I was like, why not? And now I really like it.
Nice.
I think it's a
That's
really
awesome.
good intro to historical fiction if you haven't read it before.
And Rihanna, I'm going to tell you, as a former history undergraduate major,
I am a history major, so.
so this is why you're going to really connect to this, because in addition to picking up Grapes of Wrath, I also discovered that Ken Burns did a PBS series on the Dust Bowl.
Oh.
And the first episode, which I watched over the weekend, I, as an undergraduate, went to Mount Holyoke College. The first person that he sort of does a biography of is a woman from Oklahoma who went to Mount Holyoke College and graduated in like 1910, something like that. And her goal was to become a farmer on her own, by herself, to go back to her home county. The other things that I learned, about, I didn't know that much about the history of the Dust Bowl or much of anything about it, really. I studied European history. But there are so many things, in addition to sort of the labor element of this, there's the environmental impact of mechanized farming on the Great Plains, which I discovered through the Ken Burns series, used to be covered with just buffalo grass, which was something that had adapted itself to the environment and sort of the drought situation that has happened in that part of our country for so long. And when the push west came and the homesteaders, and they were giving land away, people like this, woman from Mount Holyoke and many, many others went out there and started doing large scale mechanized farming, including wheat, which at the time of World War I was very, very important. And it kind of spills into what happens in California, is when the drought comes and the agriculture is no longer booming along like it has been for years and years and years, where people were exclusively planting one crop. Drought, it all dies. And, paired with changes in the economy or changes in the world situation, you end up with the people who own the land, who have to pay the workers less and less and less and less in order to be profitable. And that's what we saw play out in California. And it's what played out in the Dust Bowl that pushed all of those people into California. So that's why it's just sent me down this rabbit hole of new information that I'm embarrassed to say I didn't know that much about.
Yeah, I really have not known a lot about like the Dust Bowl in general either. We barely covered it in history in school. So yeah, I think this is really interesting.
I also was interested when she got to California to see the sheer prejudice that the native Californians had for all the people coming in. Like they were all called Okies, no matter, you know, where they were from, and the deplorable conditions. And to see how much of it, sadly, is still relevant today with migrant labor, you know, I'm just sitting there thinking, well, I guess they kind of go through the same thing, you know. That was very eye-opening to me. Like you said, Rihanna, I think there's a lot of history that we don't learn in school, or they kind of touch on major topics, but they're like, I don't remember really learning about the Dust Bowl. I had no idea that it was all the topsoil that was blowing away.
Right.
And that, you know, Roosevelt, when he started that program, it was to get them to relearn their farming methods to protect the environment, you know, so. Yeah, that was a real eye-opener for me.
Yeah, I think in school, I was probably around 7th or 8th grade when we talked about it. It's probably a couple minutes we mentioned it, just like, oh, it was during the Depression. There were dust storms. People didn't like it. That's it.
It's actually one of the greatest environmental disasters of our country. I mean, it just was very, very bad.
Yeah, like these people were literally dying the longer they stayed there, and it was the earth like revolting against them, which I thought was insane.
Yeah. And I thought it was very interesting when they had the meetings when like the Department of Agriculture guys come through and they're like, we want to pay you to not plant. And the farmers were like, no. Because like losing all of my words, like the science of farming was still so new, the science of agriculture was still so new that and especially dealing with, you know, the Western environment, as Cassie was saying, it hadn't been it wasn't being worked for very long. So you're muted, Cassie.
There was no precedent for it. This was not something that they had seen. And I think also what you just said, Kirstra, about when the government came and said, we want to pay you not to plant. If you think about the reasons why a lot of the Europeans that are featured in this book, so, you know, Italians, Germans, you know, why they came to America was because there was no land to be owned from their home country. And then you kind of couple that with this very American, you know, westward expansion, homesteader, and just kind of the whole American freedom and independence, you know, theme that's run through our country's history. So I think for a lot of these farmers, it was a point of pride that they didn't want to be paid for not doing something. You know, that isn't why they came here. They came here for the promise of America, which was if you worked hard, no matter who you were, you could succeed. And now they have the American government coming in and saying, look, we want to pay you not to do this. That I think really was difficult for a lot of those, you know, at that time, the immigrants that we're talking about were mostly European immigrants that were coming into that part of our country. So
yeah, I remember Tony a couple times throughout the book saying like how important the land was to him, how he wouldn't give it up, how it was his life and everything. And I remember him being very upset when the people were coming in to say, you guys shouldn't be farming, and they just didn't know what to do with themselves, because that's what they built their lives around once they came here.
And if I can make like a kind of a present day connection to that, the oil industry, right? I mean, the amount of gas that we use, you know, there's and I'm not trying to be political. I just think it's a reality that there's people in our country who, on the one hand, think we need to reduce our gas consumption as much as possible and our reliance on fossil fuels. And then the other half of our country is like, no, this is a very American thing. We're getting American oil, and this is, it's kind of a version of that with farming.
People have always just been very prideful. They don't want to admit that maybe they're not doing the right thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
All right. Has anybody else read The Nightingale?
Mm-mm.
Shoot.
I want to.
I think if you are delving into historical fiction, that is really good. Besides the fact that I think they're making a movie with those two sisters that you would probably know and whose name is escaping me right now. But anyway, I did notice a pattern with the trajectory of where Elsa's life goes. And I don't really want to spoil too much because that's like the final bomb. But I wondered if that was a Kristin Hannah thing. Like I'd love, I haven't read a lot of her other novels because I think she also started more as a romance novelist. Am I correct?
I think so. Sort of like contemporary romance, light.
Chick litty type of thing. Yeah. Which I don't read much of that. I read weird, dark stuff or, I do like historical fiction, but that was something I almost felt like I could see what was coming for her. And it bothered me because, here you have this woman who adapts her own life, but then still ends up kind of tragic. So, yeah.
Well, and there were some parallels with The Winter Garden as well. So at least you've got the mother, largely absent, father, 2 children, older daughter expected to do a lot of the caretaking of the younger son. So, yeah.
That's very specific.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I know this is like the spoiler special, but how spoiler are we being?
Oh, I mean, so I think we've been dancing around it. I think we probably just need to talk about where Elsa's story goes.
Okay, that ending.
Do you want to lay it out for us, Rihanna? What happens?
Okay. Yeah, so I mean, if I can just say it.
Yeah.
Towards the end, as they are getting more involved with the unions, they're getting more involved with the labor movement and everything. They start to go on strike at their fields where they have been picking cotton, I believe. So they start to go on strike, and it gets pretty messy towards the end. There is some resistance and shots are fired. And sadly, Elsa does get shot, and she does end up dying at the end of the book, which was very heartbreaking because it was her and her 2 children in California, almost alone, aside from the few friends they had made along the way. And just that ending really hit me. I was not expecting that. I haven't really read any books before where the main character gets killed off. So I was like, you're not allowed to do that.
Don't ever read any of the Game of Thrones books. Just saying.
Oh no.
Just saying. No, but yeah, the thing that got to me about the ending was that Elsa was like, she spent the whole book sort of turning from this meek little mousy person to sort of finding herself and finding family and realizing that she had self-worth, basically. Like the whole thing is her figuring out that she can like provide for herself and her children. And at the end, she's like, I mean, standing in her power, she gets up to like make her voice heard. She gets shot and killed. Like she's just figuring out her life and like, no, you don't get a happy ending.
And don't forget the sex with Jack.
True story.
Right? That was part of it too. We went from the back of her husband's truck to Jack, and then she just dies.
Right. She gets this like new love that she thinks is real and true. I really liked that character too. He was a really cool person. And then just cut short. And her kids were right there too, which really was
Yeah.
heartbreaking for me.
And tell me her daughter is not going to have lifelong guilt from that. I mean, she
Right.
acts
Wow.
like, oh, you know, my mom was so inspiring and everything. But okay, you and your mom were going at it like this.
That
And
really angered me.
What's daughter's name?
Loretta.
Loretta. You know, she decides to speak because let's not forget throughout the book, it's like, look, we have a job. We're not starving. I'm providing food, you know.
Mhm.
We are so much better off than everybody else. So she really does a 180 from where she is to where she's going, you know, with a new boyfriend and some, you know, most of it though, I think she wanted to see where Loretta was headed in her own personal journey.
Mm.
Yeah, and her reward for that was.
So do you think, Claire, then that the Elsa standing up and like making the speech was her sort of playing to Loretta and Jack? It wasn't heartfelt?
No, I do think it was heartfelt.
Okay.
The way that I kind of looked at it, and I related to this because in addition to being a history major, I was also a philosophy major, right? I read a lot of Russian literature. So there's that whole thing of the choices that you make sometimes because you have to make those choices. Mm-hmm. So if there's a group of, 20 children in front of you and 2 of them are yours, and you see something coming towards them that is very, very dangerous, and you can only save 2 children, which 2 are you going to save? So I feel like Elsa really at the beginning, and this is why she and Loretta were clashing so much, was because Loretta was younger, idealistic, but in many ways was seeing things in a much bigger way than the mother, right? And if you're a mother, you I guess understand this in a way that is really visceral, is that you want to protect and feed and take care of your children first, and then any ideals have to come after that. It's not that you can't be idealistic, it's just that you have to prioritize the things that you're faced with. And I feel like that's how Elsa started, but then at the end, through her daughter and through Jack, and I think through her own experiences of being treated the way that she was treated at the company store and by the landowners, came to it on her own.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. Sorry, I was at the Maslow's pyramid is what I was doing here.
Hierarchy of needs.
Yes. So, and they were just at different places in the hierarchy, right? Because Elsa's always putting Loretta first, making sure her needs are met.
Making sure she's fed.
Sorry.
Go ahead.
I found their relationship to be very interesting because they did clash a lot during the book, and it kind of hurt me seeing Loretta be so rude to her mom throughout the entire book. She would keep saying things like, oh, Dad didn't leave us, he left you. And personally, I have a very good relationship with my mom, and so seeing that just like broke my heart. It made me so sad because by the end of the book, I feel like we did mention this already, but she was kind of saying, oh, my mother was the greatest woman I knew. She inspired me so much, but throughout the entire book, she was being so rude to her and constantly belittling her, which was really interesting.
Yeah, I felt like some of that was just like being a teenager, like that sort of establishing like your separate identity.
Right.
Your parent, right? But I think some of it was also probably that Loretta and Rafe were so tight. We haven't talked about Rafe really hardly at all. Right. We probably should. But that they had sort of this special relationship. And I think Rafe looked down on Elsa quite a bit. And when you have a parent who holds another parent in contempt, I think that can sort of slip into the children's perception too.
Exactly.
I feel like Cassie disagrees with me.
No, I don't disagree with you. Here's what I guess I would say is, I think, probably shouldn't say this, but I'm going to. Women do better in difficult times than men do. And, you know, but when you're a young woman, a teenager, you don't really have that life experience that an adult would have, a parent would have. So from Loreda's point of view, you know, Rafe didn't want to be concerned with the things that Elsa knew they needed to be concerned with, like making sure that Ant, who's the boy, Anthony, that Ant, his dust pneumonia, which I didn't realize was a real thing, you know, that his dust pneumonia didn't get worse, that there was food on the table for her in-laws and for both of her children. And Rafe didn't know how to cope in that kind of environment. So he kind of fell back on being the fun parent. And I think that for Loretta, that was kind of what, you know, her mother understood more, or at least expressed an understanding more than her father of the really dire circumstances that they were in. And we know that Rafe ultimately couldn't handle the difficulties because he just left with no explanation. He just took off. So I thought that rang really true to me, kind of that whole dynamic of, and of course I'm stereotyping, but in my experience, at least, kind of the difference between maternal and paternal ways of doing things.
Yeah. Can I just say, I thought that Rafe was going to have committed suicide when he ran away. That's what I thought she was building up to. I was like, oh, she's going to find him in the barn.
Yeah, I thought the same thing. Yep.
Okay. All right.
I was so scared for that.
Because then the fact that he didn't made me think like he was going to reappear at some point.
Yeah, there's no closure.
Yeah. Where did he go? What happened to him? We don't know.
Right. I kept expecting him to just pop up sometime in the book in California, like they just magically meet at some point. So it just definitely kept me like guessing the entire time. I feel like in a way that might have been worse, especially for the whole family too.
Well, yeah, because the kids, I think, were doing the same thing. She talks about them like looking out the windows of the car, like looking at all of the faces, like looking for their dad.
Yeah.
Okay, I have something to say, and then I'm going to read a little bit too, just because I have to. So I had a really difficult time with Elsa's death, but not for the same reason that Rihanna expressed. I was just squirming at the dialogue. She lifted a hand, pressed her palm to his cheek so he could feel her touch one last time. Take them home for me, she whispered against his lips. He nodded. Elsa, God, I love you. Loretta slipped in beside Jack, who stepped aside. Hey, Mom, Loretta said in a threaty voice. Elsa stared up at her brash, beautiful, impetuous daughter. I wanted to watch you take on the world, baby girl. I'm sorry, that has got to be, for me, the worst piece of dialogue. And having said that, I enjoyed this book. I just want to make myself clear. But that was just so saccharine, over the top. It made me angry, quite frankly.
Well, that's where that romance
maybe that's what it is. I too am not a romance reader. So maybe it just seemed stilted and forced and not authentic.
I kind of agree. If you just got shot and you're kind of bleeding out, you're not going to be like, tell them I love them, you know?
Yeah. So, be like, I'm dying, damn it. So I'm going to say what I want to say now, and it's not going to be about all of you.
Right.
So one of the things that I think, so I liked this book. I didn't love it. I liked it quite a bit, and I was engaged with it. I think what Kristin Hannah does really well is sort of the portrayal of the historical period. I think that was really great. And I think she gets sort of the broad strokes of emotion, right? Like she hooks you and keeps you engaged with the characters. And we can talk about whether or not all of the characters were like fully three-dimensional. Rafe, I'm looking at you, and how you disappear sideways. But I think the emotions ring true, and the emotion of Elsa's experience rings true. And you know, so I think the big broad strokes are there. I think some of the finer points and details
Yeah, she was tired. It was right at the end of the book, and
Yeah.
some of the dialogue got a little iffy. No, I agree
Yeah.
with
Knows
you.
it's a
I think the broad
bestseller.
strokes of the emotion, I do think you're
Mhm.
right. Right. She definitely nailed that.
To me, it seems like it's written like almost like in that portion, especially like a screenplay. You know what I mean? Like you can picture all of this going on a movie, and I felt the same way about the Nightingale,
Yeah.
because the sister that actually went out and started saving people and smuggling them out of Paris. At first, she was also. Am I the only one? I was really irritated with Elsa in the beginning. Just so irritated. It was like, for God's sake, woman, pull your socks up and let's move on, you know. But you forget, like during that time period, as an older daughter, you know, it took everything she had to kind of break that mold, you know.
Mhm.
Her family was horrendous. I wanted to smack her mother so hard, you know.
Mhm.
Yeah, but
The thing that bothered me about her family, and I couldn't quite square it, so maybe y'all will have some thoughts on it, is the fact that, like, ostensibly she gets sort of sheltered and kept at home because she had this illness as a child and her heart was weak, which is, you know, again, the metaphor that kind of comes back throughout the book, her weak heart. But her heart was weak, so she shouldn't like exercise or exert herself or have strong emotions. So she gets kind of just like tucked up in the library. But at the same time, her family doesn't seem to actually care about her at all. Like, so part of me is like, if you don't care, just let her run down the block and her heart will explode and then you'll be, you know, done. But I'm sorry, but like, I feel like you can't quite have it both ways. Like there's this over concern with her well-being and also like no concern at all with her as an actual human person.
right.
I couldn't quite bridge the gap between those two.
It might have been more about just the control aspect of it, like the fact that they could kind of control her. I'm not really sure because that definitely stumps me too. You'd think, oh, if they're saying like, you need to stay here, you need to stay safe and healthy, we need to protect you, you'd think that would show a certain level of care.
Right, of concern.
Right. They were saying, what are you doing? You look like a dishonorable woman. You shouldn't be going out like this.
Right.
And it's like, what do they want her to do?
Well, I think one thing is they, you know, there was a real sense for me, at least, of propriety, you know, that,
sure.
So what really struck me, and this was kind of weirdly developed throughout the novel, you know, early on, we're told that by Elsa, that she's not as attractive, or she's unattractive, or she's this and she's that, and her sisters are something else. So I sort of thought, well, you know, the weak heart was maybe just a way for the family to not have her out with them, because they perceived that her appearance or whatever it was about her was something that, you know, so in that sense, they cared, which also would kind of line into, you know, the propriety of having you know, what do you call it when you're not married? Having relations as not a married person in, you know, this time period, and, you know, scandalously doing it with an Italian, which at this time, you know, the Irish and the Italians were
not white.
They were not considered to be white. And, you know, you throw the religion thing on top of that, and then it becomes more about, let's, you know, keep her so she's not an embarrassment to us. But of course, people know that she's our daughter.
Right,
so if we don't want her coming out with us because we think she's not as good as the rest of the family, but we also know that we can't just send her away because heavens, what would people think? So I think the part that confused me later on is, you know, when Jack says things like, not confused me, but Elsa, you're beautiful. There seems to be this like not fully developed storyline that maybe she was always this really attractive person and she was the only one who didn't see that, whatever attractive means.
No, I definitely picked up on that too, Cassie. The like, whether it's just her like own warped sense of herself, but then we also have Rafe who doesn't, I don't know. So yeah.
Yeah, he was just
He was just looking for a little something, I think.
Apparently.
And she had the red dress on. I don't know.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she listened to him.
right.
Let him go on
True.
about his dreams and such. Because he already was engaged to someone else and
Mhm.
supposed to go off to college, which, you know, she
Yeah.
did pull the plug on all that, showing up pregnant.
Well, he kind of pulled, I mean,
Oh, no, but, you
Yeah.
know,
no, I know what you're saying, but like that bothered me. I was like, it wasn't her fault,
yeah,
or at least not just her fault.
yeah. Well, back in those days, that wasn't
No, I
the
know.
case.
I know.
Yeah, and I feel like Elsa was kind of just very enamored with him because he was kind of the first man that she had ever honestly really even met.
Yeah,
Right.
and the first one who like paid her any kind of attention.
So obviously she was just like, oh, I'm in love with you. Like immediately off the bat. She might not have said it like that, but
Yeah.
it basically seemed like that. And so
Well,
Yeah.
her whole life too, up to that point, was reading about romance in books, right?
Mhm.
So, like you said,
Yeah.
Rihanna, she didn't really have any practical experience with the opposite sex except what she read in novels.
Yeah,
So
so the
why
first
wouldn't she
guys
think
were
she was in
movies.
love? Yeah.
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 And it's sad because the very beginning of the book made it seem like maybe they actually will be happy. Maybe they actually are in love.
Mhm.
And then you get through the rest of the book.
Mhm. Well, and Rafe only sticks around for like the first quarter.
Oh yeah, he was like not a character at
He
all,
was-
really.
He was
Like-
gone.
He's mentioned on the dust jacket, like right in the summary, he's mentioned as like a main character.
Well, I mean, without him, none of the rest of it would have happened.
True. I
But
was just surprised because I thought he'd be someone that just stuck through the whole time.
mhm.
But he was
Yeah.
just gone. He said bye.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was interesting.
Now I know, Claire, you also had some feelings about like the little epilogue at the end with
Oh.
Loretta. Did you want to talk about that at all?
Dear Kirsten.
I just putting you on the spot.
Yeah, I have literally read.
What
What did I say? Can you
At the end
remind
of the book, there's a time jump. So Loretta is now 18. She's
Oh yeah,
ready to go
I'm
to
mad.
college,
I'm mad
and
that
she decides. Now you remember.
to go back to California to college.
Mhm.
And I'm like, why on earth would you go back there? You know, after the
Yeah.
way you were treated and what happened to you, why not go to U Texas or Texas A&M or something like that? I don't know. It just, you know, when she's sitting there pondering in her mother's grave, yeah, that ticked me off, the whole thing.
It definitely seemed like a way to just really wrap it up quickly. Looking back at it, it could have been done a little bit better, I think. I feel like it definitely, like Claire said, it was a little out of character for her to want to go back to California now. But I'm a very sappy person. I'm very emotional. So I was already so sad by the ending that this little epilogue just made me like, okay, everything's okay now.
Yeah.
So
Well, I think that's what she was trying, and that she was almost like reclaiming her,
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
past by
Yeah.
going back there. But I was just thinking, first of all, how they got back with her robbing the store. Oh, am I too much?
No,
But,
it's a spoiler special.
yeah, yeah, like the whole ending for me, you know, kind
Mhm.
of was too theatrical and everything. I don't know.
Well, I think they kind of ended up in a corner. So Elsa's dead. You've got two kids under the age of what? How old is Loretta? Like 14, 15?
Yeah, I think so.
So two kids in California with no parents, completely orphaned. And you've got your like union organizer boyfriend with no fixed address. Like, what do you do at that point?
he's just their dad now.
Right. Like they had to wrap up the kid situation somehow. And clearly Jack could not just like be their dad. Like, so I mean, I don't think there was any other option really, except for the kids to end up back on the farm with their
Not at 400
parents.
pages in already. Right? You want to write another couple hundred pages about Jack takes over, you know, parenthood of the two children. But you're right. If you want to kind of end the book, that's really the only option.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. But I don't know. I kind of agree, Claire. I feel like Loretta is a little more of a sort of scorched earth character than like a let's reconcile the past. But I mean, everyone grows up, so who knows?
I did think it was kind of odd though how in the epilogue she just kept saying like, oh, I wish I told my mother like how much she meant to me, how I still carry her with me and everything. It's like you could have told her that. You could have told her that you loved her maybe once.
You could have been nice for once, Loretta.
Oh my gosh, that just really annoyed me throughout the whole book. I know I mentioned it already, but
I wonder if Kristin Hannah has a teenage daughter.
yeah, she's just writing an autobiography.
Oh, right? I mean, it just, that's kind
Working
of like,
through some feelings.
I am the mother of 2 boys. So that was like kind of that whole, like, it didn't strike me. It was very one-dimensional, Loretta's character and her interactions with her mother. And then, yeah, it did seem kind of discordant at the end to have her, you know, oh, I wish I had this and I wish I had that. I don't know. It didn't really ring true to me.
I think it felt more to me like sort of the feelings you would have as like a middle-aged person losing a parent than someone who is fundamentally still a teenager.
Yes.
Right.
Grappling with that kind of loss.
Yeah, I think that's fair for sure.
Seemed a little too wise for her age.
Yeah.
Yeah. I did love some of the little motifs that just kind of carried throughout the book too. Like the coin where they kept saying hope is a coin I carry. I absolutely love that line. Yeah, I just really loved seeing things that I could just follow throughout the book. Metaphors and stuff that just kept appearing.
Yeah. Nice. Awesome. Anything else, any other feelings or thoughts that we haven't touched on that anybody needs to cover?
I really love the grandparents.
Yeah, they were great.
Tony and Rose,
Yeah.
I love them so much.
Yeah.
I think even though it was really sad when Elsa died, I think I was a lot more sad when they said they weren't going with them to California. That broke my heart.
Yeah.
Well, because they were the first real family that Elsa had that treated her like family, right?
Yep.
Yeah. They went from kind of taking her in because they had to, because that's what was like seen as right at the time, to becoming basically like parent and child.
Yeah.
Because I remember when they said they weren't going with them to California, I believe Rose said something about how Elsa is the daughter she always wanted, and how Rose was the mother that Elsa always needed or something.
Yeah.
Yeah, that relationship to me rang true for sure. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I like this book a lot.
Good. I'll be interested if you read more Kristin Hannah. I'll be interested to hear
I would
what
love
you
to.
think.
Read The Nightingale. I need someone to talk to about it.
And check out the Ken,
No pressure.
check out the Ken Burns Dust Bowl PBS
Yeah, I'm gonna look
series.
that up.
Yeah.
Right. I kind of want to learn more about this period now.
It's very interesting because it's such a mix of things. You know, it's the labor stuff, it's the environmental stuff, it's the, you know, sort of American exceptionalism. Like there's really a lot there. And what I did really say the most positive thing about this book for me was she got me interested in knowing more about that period. You know, I didn't find this to be necessarily great literature or, you know, clever in a lot of ways. You know, some of that stilted dialogue really bugged me, but she accomplished something pretty impressive for me, that I picked up Grapes of Wrath, and that I, you know, poked around and, hey, Ken Burns did a PBS series on the Dust Bowl. I should watch that. So she accomplished, I think, a big part of her goal.
Awesome.
Just so you know, the Ken Burns Dust Bowl, like all the Ken Burns, are available on Hoopla. So,
Ooh.
yeah, there you go.
Now
That is a
there's an
fantastic
interesting idea. Yeah.
Okay.
Nice.
And then one last thing. Out of 5 stars, what would you guys rate this?
I don't remember if I gave it a 3 or a 4.
Ooh.
Kind of somewhere in the middle of 3 and 4.
Oh,
I did
okay.
4. Yeah.
3.5.
Yeah.
5.
Well,
Hey.
my reading tastes are very different from
Mhm.
this, so maybe a 4. I don't know, 3
Yeah.
and 3/4. Brianna, just for you, okay? Just for you, my fellow history major.
Just for me. Yeah, I feel like my expectations weren't super high because I really don't know a lot about historical fiction. So when I actually enjoyed it, I was like 5 stars.
Nice.
And I think for me, after reading this, I'm happy that I read it, but I don't feel any need to read any of her other books. I'm sorry, Kristin, that sounds terrible, but
Hope
it's
you
just
didn't watch this.
my jam,
Yeah. Hey, we made Claire read horror for our last
Yeah, give me a good horror novel any
special.
day.
So,
Yeah.
not every book is going to do it for every reader, which is
I got
great.
my 14-year-old has
Whole
started reading
library.
The Stand by Stephen King. This is one of my greatest accomplishments, both as a librarian and as a mother. I came home from work
Awesome.
yesterday and he's sitting on the couch with his copy of The Stand.
That's a big one.
Yeah,
Yes,
my
it
son
is.
loved The Count of Monte Cristo, and to my great shame, I have not finished it yet. It's like
I never even started it, Claire, if it makes you feel any better.
he's read it twice. Good Lord. Yeah. So for every book is its person
Yeah,
and all that
absolutely.
stuff. Yeah.
For
Yeah.
every reader, his or her book.
Mhm.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for joining us for this spoiler special. And for everyone watching today, please do leave us comments and let us know what you thought about The Four Winds if you had read it, what other books you think we should read about the Dust Bowl, and if you have thoughts for any other books that we need to spoil completely and thoroughly, let us know. But until next time, thank you all for joining us.
Thank you, Kirsten and Claire. You guys are wonderful hostesses.
Yes, thank you for having us. I really enjoyed
We're
it.
so glad you guys joined us.
Yeah, absolutely. And hopefully we will see you again soon.
Bye.